Michael Ellis, and I am the person who is creating this film called Shaping the Future, or A New Image of Humanity. The question is, who are we? What is the nature of humanity? And where are we going? What is our future? The thing is that many people look at themselves in an amorphous civilization, which is now global and interconnected, but we're all fragmented, we're all desperate, we all have conflict, we're not looking at each other as a common family. So what is this connection, this nexus of being that integrates us and which can help us create a positive future?
For a positive future, you certainly have to have positive people.
Well, in general terms, everybody wants the world to be a better place, I guess.
Yeah.
But in specific terms, as a toxicologist, obviously, I would like to see the world a little bit cleaner, a little bit more pleasant to live in.
Any qualitative moving forward in humanity, both in terms of consciousness and manifestations from the current state, is a positive future.
I think a positive future has to be created as a joint undertaking. It's the group of people together. One person, no matter how wonderful ideals he has and how positive he is, unless he affects everybody else around him and gets everybody else to actually join together in a common ground for a common goal, with enough education and understanding to know what a positive future is.
I think a positive future, Michael, would be a future where all humans, wildlife, nature, all have abundance and live with abundance.
A significant part of this film is from the conference that I convened and organised at Deakin University, Melbourne, between August the 15th and 17th, 2014. The conference was called Shaping the Future, A New Image of Humanity. We had some wonderful speakers. We had speakers speaking to us on Skype and also live speakers in the audience. In particular, we had people talking on consciousness and human excellence, particularly Niran Jiang from the Centre for Human Excellence in Sydney. We had Dr. James Hurtak and his wife Desiree talking on a new image of humanity and consciousness change. We also had Dr. Professor Avni Sali, founder of the National Institute of Integrated Medicine, who's a world expert on integrated medicine. We had Dr. Seo, environmentalist and toxicologist, who's also at National Institute of Integrated Medicine. And we also had Dr. Russell D'Souza, Associate President of the World Psychiatric Association, who was talking on society, and also he is an expert on human values and ethics and is attached in this respect to UNESCO. We had healers, we had doctors, we had environmentalists, as Dr. Roger Savory. We also had people who understand the problems of war and peace on this planet, particularly those people such as Medical Associated Prevention of War, Dr. Sue Wareham, AO, Order Australia, and Dr. Bill Williams, CEO, Campaign Against Nuclear Armaments in Australia. We also had a former head of the Democrat Party of Australia, former Senator Lynn Allison, talking on our current political situation. So we were looking at spirituality and consciousness and ways of living and healing, and the need to look at the environment and agriculture, and the change in our consciousness, and the need for reviewing ourselves and shaping the future in every conceivable way at this conference in 2014. And we hope to show you excerpts from those speeches during this film, which integrates the whole process. So, welcome. We need to look for strategies for the future, a new way of thinking, a new consciousness, and a new image of humanity, where we have the convergence of spirituality, science, and humanism. Shaping the future, increasing awareness. The ordinary person is you are the change makers, not the professors, not the consultants, not the specialists, not the politicians, not the people who think they can control, not the scientists. It's the ordinary person. They have the ability and power and light within them to make a change, as long as they have the information, as long as they have the consciousness, as long as they have the education. So we have been deceived so many years, for 2,000 years we've been deceived or more, by an old paradigm. And we need to create a new movement, a new way forwards, which becomes a dialogue and expresses new creative education, dialogue, art, film, and music. Remember the old paradigm and new paradigm. Old paradigm, left side of the brain, new paradigm, right side of the brain. So it's, we have to understand we are on a new paradigm, a new way of thinking, creativity. We have to get away from a neoconservative, rational, economic, Orwellian, raging society, which is apparent in this country at the moment and all around the world, especially in America. It is an intrusive process. It erodes creativity, freedom, and expression. So it's not a good thing that we live in at the moment.
So I want to introduce a quote, and this helps us to guide us to think about practically when we work. What is the picture? When we work with individuals, teams, organizations, what is the picture of human excellence? When you're inspired by some great purpose, some extraordinary project, all your thoughts break their bounds. You have that feeling, yeah? Even so ever small and flimsy a moment, you have that feeling. Your mind transcends limitations. Your consciousness expands in every direction. Michael touched on all this sort of concept. Yeah? It just expands. It goes all directions. And you find yourself in a new place, in a great place. And if you're emotional like me, you say in a wonderful place. Yeah? And then all the stuff that's somewhat sleeping in you, yeah? Dormant forces, faculties, talents become alive. You felt that? You felt that, yeah? It may be a very small moment when you watch the sunset or when you sit by the beach. You felt that? That's the stuff we're working with. And you discover yourself to be a greater person by far than you ever dreamed yourself to be. That's the potential stuff. That's the potential stuff. And the beautiful thing is, everybody has felt that, a glimpse of it. Everybody has a natural connection with that place, and that's the place we start from.
So Desiree and I have participated with the Parliament of World Religion as speakers, bringing together the preeminent theologians, scholars, philosophers, and we see at this time a redefinition of mythos. The structure of myth, the language of myth is being re-examined, and we're seeing a emergent spirituality on the higher level of dialogue. And what this will mean is what some of my colleagues call inner spirituality, reach into the human psyche to really find those gemstones or nuggets of information that unite all religions in the quest for higher knowledge, higher participation with the universal mind of God, and the realization that we all have divine sparks that we are reclaiming as embryo gods, waking up to the fact that we're part of a much greater evolutionary process. The keys of Enoch called the higher evolution. So as we demythologize language, namely to peel off the symbols and the cultural baggage, we're recognizing nonetheless there is a higher information consciousness awareness that is beginning to awaken. And that is what is so important about this stage. We are being challenged to wake up and take our place in the cosmos with a much higher language. I call a language of light that has no limits, that will link us with the universal keepers
and
of knowledge.
Course, some of this is in the mystical truths of all the philosophies we talked about, from the Sufi to the Kabbalistic to even the deeper Buddhist traditions and the Sanskrit. They understood that there were other realms. In fact, the Sanskrit had this story of the Vimana, which are perhaps those who could travel between various worlds. The Buddhists told us that there are many worlds, many heavens, many beings, many Buddhas, not just one Buddha. And of course, the Christ talked about the Christ consciousness that we can all share and partake in, and the power of the Holy Spirit. And what's interesting about the Holy Spirit is this was something that could be given out to all of humanity so that we would have our own insights, our own understanding.
Audience, we all know that to achieve true health, true wellness, true wholeness, we need to incorporate all aspects, the mind, the body, and the spirit. It goes without saying. Everything is connected. And indeed, we are all one. Sometimes we just forget this. We need to remember. So the connections could be our brain, our neurons within our brain. Or they can be, we've heard a lot about the gut microbiome and the microbes in our gut. They're all connected. We are the microcosm that is the macrocosm. And you saw some beautiful, one of the major screenshots that's coming up all the time is the DNA nebula and how it's incorporated into our DNA helix. And so as within, so without. We are so connected that even the humble fruit fly, the Drosophila, has 94% of the same DNA as us as human beings. So that's where a lot of the clinical research is actually done on with pharmaceutical drugs. It's actually done on the fruit fly. They get addicted to cocaine, they have depression. So everything is connected in more ways than we realise. In medical terms, we call this psychoneuroimmunology or psychoneuroendocrinology, where all the body systems basically are connected together. So what we're thinking, what we're feeling affects our immune system, it affects how our hormones are secreted, and so forth. And some fascinating research in this area.
But mindfulness is used on the go, all day long. The beauty of mindfulness is that it connects you with whatever you want to call it, higher power, divine consciousness, universal intelligence, whatever you want to call it, that's fine. Makes no difference. It's all about oneness.
Well, thank you. Well, we live in extraordinary times, and I think that's what your conference is about. Obviously, we are in a period of extreme transition. It's certainly easy to see the chaos that's created when we have that much change happening in such a short amount of time. But what I want to say to the group tonight is that, the same energetic momentum and consciousness that's driving the change that we see often as turmoil is also creating new awareness and new consciousness, an acceleration in consciousness and the availability of new consciousness unlike anything we've ever seen before. My perspective on it, and obviously my work with HeartMath would support that, is that part of the evolutionary imperative that is part of this shift is the emergence of heart intelligence. When I speak of heart intelligence, I'm talking about it from the construct of an energetic intelligence, physical, emotional, as well as spiritual. It's a high-speed intelligence. It gives us access to intuition in a practical sense, a range of information that allows us to have greater ability to discriminate, to see into things, to look at solutions to problems rather than the problems themselves. It gives us the ability to, I think, move through the challenges that we face, both individually and collectively and societally, with more poise and more grace. And my work and what motivates me to be, speaking at a conference at 9 o'clock at night my time is that I think it's an extraordinary time when the qualities of the heart that we all have known about for a long, long time have taken on new meaning and new understanding. And I think that the understanding of the power of compassion, for example, of care and action, the importance of having more compassion in these times, starting with ourselves, a more compassionate view of who we are and what we're challenged with, and then expanding that compassion across the global stage to recognize that I can sit here philosophically talking about the shift and all the great things that are happening, but there are millions of people around the world who are facing extraordinary challenges as a result of these changes. It's much more personal to them.
And where we looked at our own body and mind. We looked at the mind and body of all the other people, all living beings. And we meditated on the fact that most of our bodies, what we have is 99.9% emptiness in the body. So it appears that we have a very big body, but that big body has only 0.001% of hardness, liquidity, air and temperature, the heat, the four things that go to make a body of a human being. So in this human body, we are alive, we have six sensory organs. We have eyes, ears, nose, tongue, body and mind itself. So if these six doors opening ourselves to outside world could be properly handled. In other words, whatever we see, if we can have loving kindness towards what we see and not generate any kind of anger or greed towards what we see. Similarly, what we hear, if we can keep all those sounds, whatever we hear, without creating any kind of anger, any kind of desire within us, to that extent just spiritual. So actually, that way we meditated for 1 whole hour, looking at our own mind. And we tried to find out how our body from moment to moment behaves and how the emotions arise within us and how they behave and how the thoughts arise within us. So the physical, emotional and mental components are guided by certain principles which are universal principles which transcend all place, past, present. So that way we try to silence our mind so that our loving kindness is spread to the entire human kind as well as the entire living world. So when you have a mind and a heart which embraces the entire humanity, you are a part of universal energy. And as much as you become a part of universal energy becomes a part of you. So that transforms our lives to be happy every moment and extend our friendliness toward everything, not only humans and other living beings, but even the plant kingdom. So, from our petty lives, which is spent only to satisfy our five senses, if we can go beyond that and think of the living world as a part of myself, my responsibility, that may be where we enter peace. So in my country, whenever these conflicts occur, sometimes when people are fighting with guns and bullets are flying here and there, in complete silence, we were able to organize peace walks where we close our eyes almost half so that you see only a yard or two ahead of you, we extend loving kindness to everything around us and we walk through that. Thousands of us walk through like that. Then we sat down and we meditated.
Okay. Well, I have believed for some time that our crisis is the birth of a universal humanity, and that we are living through the evolution of our species from Homo sapiens sapiens to Homo universalis. And that this man is a transitional species, and that we are living right in the midst of the shift from one form of consciousness to a more universal, holistic consciousness, and from one form of growth to another form of growth, and to one form of technology to radical, disruptive technologies such as biotech, nanotech, quantum computing, and that if put it all together with the consciousness, the new forms of growth and the new technologies, I really believe we're at the threshold of a co-evolving, co-creative species that eventually will become universal. And I just returned from a conference at Joshua Tree called Contact in the Desert. And there were 2,000 people who were very, very interested in the dimensions of extraterrestrial contact. So that I began to place within my metaphor of our crisis is the birth of a universal humanity. What are we being born into? And so I feel on the very personal level, my own personal experience is that I'm being born into an integration of my universal, non-local self and my essential self, such that I feel I am in metamorphosis toward a species that is able to tune into the higher dimensions of reality as a new norm, as a holistic norm. And at the same time, I'm able to experience that we're being born into a universe undoubtedly filled with life. And that the real transition, I suppose, will come as we stabilize this new consciousness and make direct contact.
I'm going to give you a brief journey through integrative medicine, which is clearly the medicine of the future. In fact, but it can be available now. And there's no question about the fact that all medicine in 50 years' time in educated countries will be integrated medicine. There'll be no other medicine. The definition, well, we haven't even got time to read it, but basically it's about, compared to ordinary medicine, it's about diagnosis and treatment. Integrative medicine is about why has the person got the illness. It's about making the person as healthy as possible, even if they come in with the flu. It's about the person being responsible for their health. It's about using all of medicine, rather than just the prescription medicine. Mind you, our governments, all of them, reward doctors 3 times better. A 10-minute prescription writing doctor in an hour earns 3 times more than a 1-hour health doctor. So that's extraordinary. How could that happen in Australia? I mean, there's no guesses as to who has orchestrated that. The big pharmaceutical industry that benefit from prescription writing doctors. It's extraordinary to me how that could be happening in Australia, where a prescription writing doctor earns 3 times more than a health doctor.
This is our model at the moment, unfortunately. That's why we end up after 40 years when global pollution was first sounded. We got various guises. We got global warming, global cooling, climate change, unpredictability. But bottom line is, over 40 years, what have determined this, global pollution just leads to human pollution. And this leads to increased morbidity and mortality, I'm sure it's studied by the World Health Organization. So this has been failing almost every health budget in the world, every Western developing and underdeveloped countries raising this problem, progressing escalating health costs over 40 years, and enduring health budget constraints, which leads to dissatisfaction and worse off, discontent. When people are discontent, they want change. They vote differently. When they're dissatisfied, they can maybe handle a little bit better. But this is what's happening worldwide. This is a big problem. And this is the reason why it's a big problem, because human pollution begins in the womb. And this is true. This is a health study done in the Life Work Group in the USA. Results were shown on 205, and 287 toxins and chemicals and pollutants were tested in about 10 corporate samples. This is incredible. I thought I'd never see this happen. Being a Chinese myself, not in my lifetime, but in the world. It's amazing. China's awakening on industrial pollution. They now have about 40 million women in childbearing age there. Yeah, diagnosed with infertility. That pales in the comparison in every Western country. So even a country with 1.2 billion people, officially, and 1.6 billion in reality, people are worried, because the reason is, they're actually funding a study, a very big study, the biggest of its kind in the world. Right? Now, it's very incredible, because when I went to China and I was talking to some professors there and say, we're going to do a small pilot. I say, oh, okay, I don't mind helping you. I would say, okay, that was a small pilot, 1 million people. It's all relative. It's all relative. The numbers are staggering. You just can't understand your numbers, But really, this is a very serious study, and China has woken up. Now, this is in the context of Japan, who's facing the last 20 years with a very poor socioeconomic outlook. It's because
globalization is a complex process and phenomenon which has different meanings. And as you can see, there's ongoing controversies on its and debates on its benefits and costs, as well as its consequences and harm due to globalization. We also know that globalization, it has an effect not only on economy, trade, environment, science and technology, education, but also on health. And of course, then the issue of bioethics, which is what I'm I'm the current head for Asia Pacific, and I'll tell you, I have Professor Dion Glow, who's from my Center for Bioethics, which we've set up Asia Pacific Studies in Bioethics, part of the UNESCO here. So with that, one of the important things, there's very little direct research on the effects of globalization on mental health. We know there's a range of literature across different disciplines. And of course, the possible impact of globalization on health and in mental health. And importantly, we look at how do political and economic factors outside the world of academic and clinical psychiatry, or for that matter, health, influence population, mental health, and health itself. Now, it's complex to study this, and so studying because of the societal transition and so forth. So the mechanisms of how societal change affects health remain grossly under-researched, and this is from the Lancet and so forth. So we see why is it so hard? Why is it understudied? Because issues that affect the study of societal factors such as measurement, confounding factors, and the effect of modifying variables, policy, response, and important management of transition. And we can see some of the reasons for that. The other issues we also are looking at are some of the factors in what we have studied in the Western world. Can we make it globalize it and say that it's the same everywhere. And we looked at the risks for suicide, and the question is it universal? So what we see actually is that while the studies in the West have shown that suicide, 90% of the patients with suicide will have a diagnosable depressive illness.
The social determinants of health are probably the most important things we can think of regarding health and well-being of the individual and the community and the environment at large. It's been found that the social determinants are determinants more significantly than allopathic medicine, because we have those social determinants occurring in a positive way that itself can create healing. What are the social determinants? So Michael Marmot, as Professor of Epidemiology and Public Health at the International Centre for Health and Society at University College London, produced these, which he also produced for the World Health Organization. They are social and economic circumstances strongly affect health. Stress harms health. We're in a very stressful society. Effects of early development in the neonatal period of infancy last a lifetime. Social exclusion creates suffering and morbidity. Remember that refugees, marginalization, all create health. Ill health, also unemployment, can create premature death. So the basic way we look at society and community, the way we deal with them, and whether we treat them with love and respect or disregard them has a huge effect. Also, stress in the workplace increases the risk of disease, job security, social support, friendship, good social relations, and then addiction to drugs and alcohol, nutrition and transport, the kind of transport we use, the walking we use, or the cars we use. If we do a lot of walking, it's good. We keep on staying in cars all the time and not doing exercise, that adversely affects the health. So all these are basis for an overarching blueprint for the component of health that we look upon in an individual and also social way.
My purpose in this presentation is to propose links between the myriad crises we face across the planet, from levels of personal and community health to the failures of natural systems, and levels of human development generated by the current education paradigm. To suggest where those failures in education lie, and to suggest how educating more inclusively can facilitate greater proportion of the populations to access those farther reaches described by Maslow and others. Because it is from the perspective of those farther reaches of human development that our way of being on the planet will come into alignment with life. Unity. The whole of reality is entangled within a web of interconnected relationships. We and the world is an ecological whole. John Bell's mathematical insight was very clear. No theory compatible with quantum theory can require spatially separate events to be independent. A more inclusive level of consciousness involving emotional intelligence is required to recognise, believe and live according to this principle of interconnectedness. Unfortunately, even in the developed world, only some 10% of the adult population achieves such post-formal levels of development capable of living this. When we live with a sense of unity, we hold the preciousness and sacredness of the earth as a jewel, as we would a jewel in the palm of our hands. However, this is more what's happening now.
Now, I'm here to talk to you about this idea of a treaty. And that's what ICAN's about. We have one goal, and that is a ban on nuclear weapons. There are bans on dum-dum bullets, chemical weapons, biological weapons, landmines, cluster munitions, but none on nuclear weapons. There's no ban on nuclear weapons. They're still legal, actually. There is, for example, a non-proliferation treaty, which has all sorts of segments in it which deter nuclear weapons development and so forth, but it's not a ban, and it certainly proved inadequate. So in 2007, a group of us got together internationally, and since then we've been working on building this campaign for a nuclear weapons ban. Essentially, it would ban development, testing, production, stockpile, transfer, and use and threat of use. Relatively simple in that sense. But can you do that? Yes, you can. It's technically not actually that difficult. The difficulty, as with so many of these things, is with the political will. And of course, that's why I'm here today, and that's why we're trying to build the energy within civil society to put the pressure on our politicians to make our people have to cut a deal to ban these things forever. But what do? Well, first thing you do is you de-alert them. You just take them off hair trigger alert. About 3,000-4,000 of these 16,000 nuclear weapons are actually on what they call sort of launch-on warning or hair trigger alert. If you look at photographs of Obama or Putin, you'll always see someone standing behind them who's carrying a little suitcase called the nuclear football. It's the trigger system. So if Obama decides, we better bomb the Russians because they might get us first, there's really only about 15 minutes between when Obama says go and you can stop the process. And that process has actually been triggered a few times over the last 30, 40 years. It's always been arrested so far. So we would all be a hell of a lot safer if they just took them off deal. First, step one. Step two, just remove the weapons from deployment. Get them off the submarines, take them home. You don't have to get rid of them yet, just take them home. Remove them from their delivery vehicles, disable the warheads, and then remove and disfigure the pits, the triggers, the plutonium pits, just dismantle them, and then put the fissile material under international bill. So obviously this is going to take a lot of work, but you can see it can be done. So as part of this campaign, we've looked at what worked in the past in other campaigns, and we realised that the things that really work are building large networks, partnerships, gathering with people, the way you people are doing today with your conference. Really worked very well with the Landmines Coalition and the cluster munitions. Both of those were relatively weak and ineffective campaigns for quite a long time, and then they blossomed almost overnight into these very successful campaigns. Not that they've finished, but they really provide a good model for us. And we've got some very prominent supporters. Jodie Williams won the Nobel Peace Prize for her work at the Landmines Coalition.
Cancer grows, eventually it kills you, and that's the kind of model that we're working with in our economy right now. 6, ensure Australia's overseas aid contributes substantially to providing women and men in developing countries with the choice to access contraception to determine the size of their families and the space of their children. And I'd add to that health services to make sure that women don't have to have more and more babies because so many of them are not surviving childhood. I think we need to disarm and disband and substantially reduce the $29 billion that Australia will spend on defence this year, so-called defence. And I think that doesn't even count some of the boys' toys. Sorry, blokes who are here, but that's how they said to me, like submarines and so on, which are on order. I think we need a peace commission. I think we need to redouble international efforts on nuclear and cluster munitions disarmament. And we need to encourage limits on international arms trading with the eventual expectation that we get rid of our armies and their arms altogether. I think point 8 is an important one. We need to give back to nature through volunteer rehabilitation projects and recognise that we are part of nature, declare an end to the era of domination subduing and controlling nature, and we need to take evidence-based action to avoid further species loss. Some money, I won't say a lot of money, some money is spent on this purpose, but it is not evidence-based and it's largely useless. But Australia has an enormous number of endemic species and we are losing them at a very rapid rate. Number 9, this might seem a bit trivial compared with the others, but I think it's time for us to actively encourage the arts. I think they should be flourishing in schools and other institutions, in communities and workplaces, recognising the contribution of the arts to not just well-being for humans, but for understanding and reflection. I think there's an enormous contribution that can be made there. And finally, I think it's time to start detoxing the world. We need to tighten restrictions on pesticides until we get rid of them altogether, and weedicides and fungicides in our agriculture. We need to encourage organic farming and community vegetable plots and higher density housing developments.
I'm going to focus particularly on the issue of war, not so much weapons of mass destruction, but the problem of warfare, and just some thoughts as to how we can possibly go about reducing it or preventing it. And I think the title of this conference, Shaping the Future, is extremely important because we need to remember that our future is not preordained and it's a matter of what we make of it, we collectively, all 6 or 7 billion of us. So, firstly, why is war a problem? And that sounds like a bit of a stupid question, really. The answer is probably fairly obvious, that war is destructive on a massive scale and it leaves legacies which go on for decades, generations and longer. But I think it's helpful to remind ourselves of just how destructive warfare is and of some of the hidden costs that it carries with it. In relation to health impacts of war, there was a resolution at the World Health Organization in 1981, which I think is still relevant, and the resolution stated the role of physicians and other health workers in the preservation and promotion of peace is the most significant factor for the attainment of health for all. The impacts of war are vast, and I'm just going to go through some of them, not too laboriously, and then turn to how we can approach this problem. It's estimated that during the 20th century, 190 million people died as a direct or indirect result of warfare. And civilian war deaths constitute about 85 to 90% of the casualties caused by war. And this is a dramatic change from, say, 100 years ago when most of the casualties were, in fact, soldiers, military. Small arms and light weapons cause hundreds of thousands of deaths each year in war. And in addition to the death toll, there is, of course, the physical and the psychological suffering, and particularly the psychological suffering, which often goes on for a long time and is more hidden. In the United States, last year in 2013, more US troops committed suicide than died in combat.
What is this enigma that is a humanity, that is a human being? Who are we? Where are we going? I think some of the people on this conference have discussed this and looked at it from the point of view of the nature of our evolving consciousness. How can we enhance that well-being and consciousness that is within us, that spark of reality and transformation that we need in order to survive sustainably? We've talked about the problems facing us and the agendas that we have to deal with, and also the resolution that can occur that can make us more than we are and greater than we are. Thank you.